Thank you. Stocktake, or taking stock. I seem to have notched up 30-odd years of composing. And so I've been thinking about what that means, what it implies, and where, if anywhere, to go from here. Eric Satie said, "When I was young, people told me, you'll see when you're 50. I'm 50 and I've seen nothing." That is a very familiar feeling, and 50 is a few years ago now. As I move through the vicissitudes of life with alarmingly increasing alacrity, with creative work in particular, the vaguer and more elusive things become, any answers further and further from reach. The path of life itself seems to have formed into the contour of a question mark. This sense of incertitude is, though, I believe, a hallmark of maturity rather than simply aging. After all, it seems to be only youth, religiosos and politicians who ride the moral high ground of absolute conviction. Creative conviction, I think, is a different thing, and that's separate. I expect to continue in a certain state of bewilderment, since I have always understood and accepted that it is a necessary component of creativity. Confidence and surety seem to be misplaced and uncomfortably close to egotism when one is bringing something new into being, when one is reaching out into the unknown. It seems contradictory to be sure about something so elusive and untested. After all, which of us dares to second-guess posterity, not least our own contribution to it? As John Cage said, "I'm gradually learning how to take care of myself. When I die, I'll be in perfect condition." By this rather touching statement, I don't think he just meant his strict macrobiotic mushroom-rich diet, his health or physical fitness regime. He meant care of the whole self, the total being. I think he was also referring to the process of creative maturation, something that he knew would take a lifetime. I saw Cage a couple of times near the end of his life, once at a Huddersfield music festival. He was sitting just in front of me, or behind me, actually, my memory is playing tricks with me there a bit, when Irvine Arditi performed his notoriously treacherous Freeman etude for violin, with sweat running freely down his face. I made a jocular remark to the composer, and I've never forgotten the look on his face. It was a sort of happy bemusement, and he gave that characteristic breathy falsetto laugh. It was a Cagean/Dalai Lama moment, as if he himself could see the absurdity of being the same person who'd created both 4 minutes 33 and this piece of half-impossible musical virtuosity. But, like most of us, he was simply finding out who he was through his music. Accepting a state of being permanently uncertain, or at least bemused, has been aptly described by the abstract painter Agnes Martin as permanently derailed. She knew that, along with the sense of vulnerability that this entails, there is a wonderful freedom, the freedom of not being on the rails, not being set on a given path from which no detour is possible. Like Harold and his fat purple crayon of the memorable children's book, an artist or composer is able, to some extent, to draw her own path, her own world. Sometimes I think I've finished a giant scribble pattern and now need to unravel it. When I was younger, like many young composers, I was so bedazzled by the garden of delights of music I was hearing, so invigorated and full of ideas, that I needed or felt compelled to channel this energy through my own music. I've never been comfortable being part of any movement or musical tribe, because I can't see the attraction of merely keeping up with the Darmstadt Joneses, as Lilburn so aptly and somewhat waspishly put it. But often, particularly when I was younger, mainly when I was younger, I felt the comforting hand of influence on my composing shoulder, strengthened by the fire in the belly and a certain youthful guilelessness. These three forces are great drivers. There's a naive and startlingly direct quality to my early works that is poignantly very hard to recapture now that I know too much. The increasing knowledge, experience, and accumulated listening of decades can result in an overwhelming sense of overload, inhibitedness, and inertia. It was indeed a devastating insight of Shakespeare's when he wrote, "Conscience makes cowards of us all." We live in a culture where knowledge and research are claimed as higher goals. The knowledge economy, research outputs. These are part of the incrementally paralyzing business model, which has gradually infiltrated and begun to take over the institutions of higher learning, such as this very one, so that even our world of creative practice is bit by bit being held to account. In this morning's paper, no less, Tertiary Education Minister Stephen Joyce is quoted as declaring, "Research within universities is not sufficiently aligned to industry needs. It needs to be more oriented towards user needs and have potential to be commercialized. Graduates emerge from our universities lacking vital skills and incapable of the innovation needed for economic growth." End quote. Innovation, of course, is the one thing that we do deal with. Last night's Intrepid Music project, for example, saw a lineup of students and recent university graduates grappling with creative innovation in various forms, all the while making a contribution to the local art scene, which is vitally important in keeping a culture alive. I don't believe it is knowledge or research that is at the very core of the creative process. Rather, this process relies on the ability to seize the moment instinctively. And I think the way you develop instinctual values is by a non-intellectual sensibility. And here, ideas don't figure so strongly. I don't find them that useful in themselves for the creative process itself. Like opinions, everyone has one. It's easy to be opinionated, and it's easy to have an idea. They are useful, though, of course, for advancing one's creative impulse or scheme. Insight, I think, is the key, or experiences that help you to find out who you are in order to develop a deeper capacity for insight. I think that rather than learning from experiences themselves, you learn or grow by your inner nature being in contact with them. This is why I have a healthy mistrust of the term du jour, research, since it implies a gleaning of knowledge that will be useful to be applied to something, as outlined earlier in Joyce's comment. Much of what I do as a composer anyway, under the name of research, is fanciful, formless, nameless, hopeless very often, free-ranging, impractical, and ultimately useless. I personally would extrapolate this further, since I find that even music itself can get in the way of creativity. Concerts can certainly get in the way. In fact, at the risk of sounding nihilistic, composing itself can get in the way of pure creativity, which to me is about an open state of being. I rather favour quiet revelations, spontaneous or serendipitous occasions where sudden or dawning insights can act as transformative experiences. Pared back moments are often the most revealing. I often have these experiences in film, literature, and the visual arts. In Michael Haneke's recent film Amour, for example, the camera, confined as it is to a small and somewhat claustrophobic French apartment, moves away from the elderly French couple grappling with the throes of her advancing dementia and pans slowly and silently across their art collection. I found this sequence the most heart-rending in the film, more so than all the spelt-out minutiae of the deteriorating situation, because it expressed so much obliquely. It showed, not told. The watcher was invited in to become part of the film, him or herself. It reminded me of Walter Pater's famous dictum that, quote, art aspires towards the condition of music. If that is the case, then to what does music aspire? I think that music might aspire to the condition of silence. In silence or emptiness, truths can be revealed more clearly. I think that the creative act is about being in a situation in which you find out who you are through such truths. And back to Cage again. That's what 4 minutes 33 was all about. The last thing it was a stunt or a joke. Contemplating, say, the minimal canvases of a Rothko, or immersing ourselves in the sparsely populated sonic explorations of a Feldman, we are offered space and time to fill in ourselves. We come to meet it. We can meditate within it. We can become something within it. One of my favourite books is Sarah Maitland's A Book of Silence, in which the author explores her fascination with silence. She says that, quote, silence itself is a form of freedom. It generates freedom, free choices, inner clarity, and strength. A freedom from oneself, and a freedom to be oneself. I have come to the realization that I'd be perfectly happy not to be composing, not least since the expectations, the potential to fail, the general angst of the whole thing feels harder than the reward. And the result of all the concomitant anguish and difficulty is often a mere ego inflator, a mere prop for the illusion one has created for oneself, or with which one has been bestowed, or just a justification of one's status in life. What I increasingly found less interesting was all the mind clutter of the mechanics of composing, of pitch choices, harmonic, rhythmic choices. I longed for a direct, concentrated, creative utterance, a distillation as simple as a single note. As William Blake put it, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. An expression of significance, something that expresses life itself. I realized that perhaps this was an utterance beyond the nature of composing. So, where does that leave me? It leaves me nowhere, but it leaves me anywhere. When one is struck by such an epiphany, it often seems laughable in its simplicity. When I realized that I didn't need to go on composing, apart from various contractual and pragmatic obligations, I was released. I was free. Free to stop, begin again, whatever I wanted. As Morton Feldman said, now that things are so simple, there's so much to do. Or Taoism puts it another way. The great image has no shape. The way conceals itself in being nameless. There's an implied nihilism about my statements, but this isn't how they should be perceived. I feel very positive about the sense of discovery through elimination, as it were. Our family has a saying, don't elate the child. It was Dad's evening warning to anyone overstimulating a junior family member before bedtime, lest there be tears, tantrums, or other temperamental excesses, just as tranquility was required. We still use the expression, don't elate the child. In fact, since when applied to adults, it's ironic and amusing within the family. But there's a deeper truth. The child in general is now constantly overstimulated. This child certainly is. It's increasingly hard to find a place to belong in the noise of the culture. By belonging, I don't mean cultural, familial, institutional, tribal, or other social belonging. I'm referring to a creative spot, a creative dwelling place, a secret dwelling place that an artist or composer inhabits. A spot where stimulation can be monitored, turned off, or at least turned down. I love the way Buddhism values vast emptiness and nothing holy, that we need to be empty so that the things of this world can reveal themselves to us. When you find that this place is within yourself, it's a revelation. Thank you.